Have you ever been in a relationship where something just felt off? You're texting them, no reply. You open up emotionally, crickets. You start to pull away, suddenly they're warm again. Yeah, you're not crazy. You're dealing with someone who has avoidant attachment. And let me tell you, what they say in counseling will shock you. They won't say this to your face, but behind closed doors in therapy, the truth pours out, and it's messy, raw, and real. Today, I'm going to give you the 5 things avoidants admit in counseling that they'll never ever tell you. So buckle up, because if you've ever felt confused, dismissed, or like you're loving someone with an emotional force field around their heart, this will hit you right in the gut, but in the best way. One of the most jaw-dropping confessions avoidants make in counseling, but rarely, if ever, say out loud to the people in their lives is this: I'm terrified of needing someone. To outsiders or even their partners, it might seem like they're just emotionally detached or even arrogant, but that's not the real story. What's really going on is something far more vulnerable and far more painful. Avoidantly attached individuals often grow up in environments where emotional dependence was either unsafe, unreliable, or outright punished. Maybe they had a parent who was emotionally distant, only available on their terms, or someone who shut them down when they expressed vulnerability. Over time, they internalized a simple but powerful belief: if I need someone, I will get hurt. So what do? They become self-reliant to a fault. They learn to soothe themselves, solve their own problems, and emotionally isolate, even when they're physically surrounded by people. In fact, being in close proximity to someone they care about can actually activate a kind of panic inside. The deeper the emotional connection, the higher the internal alarm bells ring, not because they don't love or care, but because that love threatens the one thing they've clung to for survival: control. In counseling sessions, they'll admit things they've never said to their partner. They'll say, every time I start to rely on someone, I feel like I'm losing myself, or I don't want to be vulnerable because what if they leave? It's not that they don't want love, they deeply do, but love represents a risk. The risk of being seen fully, the risk of being rejected after being seen fully, and perhaps most terrifying of all, the risk of becoming dependent on someone else for emotional safety, something they've taught themselves never to do. This fear of need isn't rational. It's reflexive. It kicks in even during simple, everyday moments. Maybe you send them a loving text, and instead of responding with warmth, they feel smothered. Maybe you ask for more emotional presence and they interpret that as pressure. To you, it might feel like they don't care, but to them, it feels like a threat to their internal safety system. The second they sense that someone might be relying on them too much, or that they might start relying on someone else, the walls go up fast. They might start pulling away, ignoring calls or texts, keeping conversations surface level, or suddenly getting busy. What looks like distance is actually self-protection. They're not doing it to punish you. They're doing it to keep themselves from feeling like they're being swallowed whole by emotion. And here's the kicker. They often hate that about themselves. In counseling, they'll confess things like, I wish I could just relax and be close to people, or I feel like I'm wired wrong. There's shame underneath that avoidant behavior. They know it hurts people. They know it pushes away love. But the fear of emotional dependence runs so deep that they feel trapped between wanting connection and fearing it. The saddest part is that the very thing they fear, needing someone, is what they crave most. Human beings are wired for connection, and avoidants are no exception. But they've learned to associate that need with pain, betrayal, or suffocation. So even as they long for intimacy, they're working overtime to keep it at a safe distance. What they need isn't more pressure or accusations that they don't care. What they need is space to feel safe and eventually permission to start rewriting that old script. In counseling, that's exactly what starts to happen. When they finally say out loud, I'm terrified of needing someone, they're beginning the journey towards something radically brave, learning to trust love again. One of the most emotionally complex things avoidantly attached people reveal in therapy is this paradoxical truth. They crave love deeply, but they don't trust it. This is a hard one to understand from the outside. If you've ever loved someone who's avoidant, it can be incredibly confusing. One minute, they're affectionate, engaged, even playful. The next minute, they're cold, withdrawn, or completely unreachable. It's not because they don't want to be close. It's because closeness triggers something in them that feels profoundly unsafe. At their core, avoidants long for connection, just like anyone else. They want to be known, seen, loved. They want to laugh with someone, share space, build a life, but they carry this invisible filter, one shaped by early relationships and emotional patterns that tells them love is dangerous. It's not that they believe people are evil or malicious. It's that emotional intimacy has historically been inconsistent, conditional, or outright painful. So even though their body might move toward closeness, their mind is sounding alarms. In counseling, they often describe love like a trap, something that pulls them in with comfort and connection, but inevitably leads to disappointment, engulfment, or loss. Some talk about feeling like they have to be hypervigilant in relationships, constantly scanning for signs that they're being manipulated or smothered. Others express a low-level anxiety whenever things are too good. It's not about the person they're dating. It's about the emotional meaning they've attached to vulnerability. When someone says, "I love you," they don't just hear affection, they hear responsibility, pressure, expectation. To them, those three words can feel like chains, not because they don't want love, but because they don't know how to believe it will last without costing them something essential, their independence, their identity, their sense of control. And because of that, they often keep a part of themselves hidden, an emotional escape hatch always ready in case things start to feel overwhelming. This is why so many avoidants report feeling like imposters in relationships. On the surface, they're committed, they're showing up. But internally, there's a gap, a fear, a narrative running in the background that says, don't let this get too real. Don't let them get too close. Don't rely on this because it could all vanish tomorrow. That voice isn't trying to sabotage the relationship. It's trying to protect them from the grief they haven't fully processed, often from years ago. And that creates a heartbreaking cycle. They want love, but they can't relax into it. They try to stay in control, but it leaves them feeling alone. They act like they don't care, but they're hurting deeply. And often they won't admit any of this to the people they're with. But in counseling, when they feel safe, it all comes out. The tears, the frustration, the shame, they'll say things like, "I don't know why I push people away," or "Every time someone gets close, I start pulling back without meaning to." The internal conflict is exhausting because they're not indifferent, they're overwhelmed. Love feels both magnetic and threatening, so they live in that tension day after day. If you're in a relationship with someone like this, you've probably felt that push-pull dynamic. You try to connect and they retreat. You give them space and they reach out only to disappear again when things heat up. It's not personal. It's not a game. It's a nervous system that hasn't learned how to trust emotional safety yet. But trust can be learned. When avoidants start to recognize the pattern, when they put words to the fear and begin to examine its roots, that's when things start to change. Slowly, with time, they begin to challenge the belief that love equals danger. They begin to test vulnerability in small, manageable doses. And eventually, they start to understand that real love doesn't consume, it supports. It doesn't demand perfection, it invites presence. And maybe for the first time, they learn that love and freedom can coexist. One of the most shocking things avoidants admit in counseling is that even when everything in a relationship seems to be going well, they're often mentally rehearsing how they would leave. This isn't because they're secretly planning a dramatic breakup or because they don't care about the other person. In fact, many times they care deeply. But inside, there's a part of them that never feels safe putting down roots emotionally, so they hold on to an internal exit strategy, not as a weapon, but as a shield. This tendency to imagine leaving isn't always conscious. It can be subtle, even automatic. Something gets a little too intense. Maybe a partner expresses a need, shares a vulnerable moment, or simply wants more connection, and suddenly, there's a voice inside whispering, "I can't do this," or "This won't last." Instead of leaning in, they lean out mentally. They fantasize about being alone, starting over, disappearing. They might even think about the logistics, what they'd say, when they do it, where they'd go. What's so confusing for their partners is that this can happen even during periods of calm and closeness. From the outside, the relationship might seem strong. Communication is decent, there's affection, shared routines, maybe even talk of a future. But inside the avoidant, there's a quiet but persistent urge to create distance, to imagine a way out. Not because they don't want to be there, but because part of them believes that needing someone is dangerous, and being attached makes them vulnerable to loss or control. In therapy, avoidants often share that this mental rehearsing of leaving is about maintaining a sense of power. They've learned, often through painful experiences, that when they get too close, they lose themselves. They fear being consumed by the other person's emotional needs or worse, abandon just as they start to open up. So instead of letting themselves depend on someone else, they keep a mental backdoor open. It gives them the illusion of safety. If things get too heavy, they tell themselves they can run. This mental rehearsal also helps them manage their anxiety. Rather than expressing fear or insecurity openly, which would require vulnerability, they shift into control mode. They detach. They fantasize about freedom. They start rewriting the story in their head, maybe even looking for flaws in their partner or reasons to justify distancing. It's not that they want to leave. It's that imagining the option to leave gives them the emotional space they struggle to ask for directly. The emotional cost of this habit is high. Partners often sense something is off but can't quite name it. They might feel like the avoidant is half present, never fully invested, or always holding back. They may even describe it as a feeling that the avoidant has one foot out the door, and the truth is, they do not because they want to hurt their partner, but because their nervous system has been wired to equate closeness with risk. Keeping distance feels safer than showing up completely. Avoidants often don't talk about this tendency openly because it feels shameful. In counseling, they'll say things like, "I don't know why I do this," or "I wish I could just stay in the moment and enjoy the relationship." They're not proud of the way they detach. They often feel guilty, especially when they know they're with someone who loves them. But the fear of losing control is so strong that they don't know how else to cope. Healing begins when they start to recognize the pattern, not as a character flaw, but as a protective mechanism that once served a purpose but now causes harm. Over time, with awareness and support, they can learn to pause the mental escape route and replace it with real-time communication. They begin to trust that discomfort doesn't have to mean danger and closeness doesn't have to mean loss. And that's when something truly powerful happens. They start staying, not because they have to, but because they finally feel safe enough to choose it. In therapy, one of the most painful and honest admissions avoidantly attached individuals make is that they sabotage relationships, not because they don't care, but because they're scared. The sabotage often isn't dramatic or obvious. It's subtle. It looks like picking fights over small things. It looks like going quiet for a few days after an emotionally intimate moment. It looks like withdrawing sexually, becoming emotionally numb, or suddenly focusing intensely on work or other distractions. To a partner, this behavior feels confusing and hurtful. But to the avoidant, it feels like self-preservation. They're not trying to ruin the relationship. What's really happening is that things are becoming too good, too close, too vulnerable, and when that happens, it kicks up a storm inside them. It brings back old fears, the kind rooted in experiences where closeness led to pain, where trusting someone meant eventually getting hurt. So just when they start to feel emotionally open, a reflex kicks in. They do something to disrupt the intimacy, to create distance, to restore a sense of control, because deep down, they fear that if they don't leave first, they'll be left. In counseling, avoidants often say they don't even realize they're sabotaging things until after the damage is done. There's a kind of emotional whiplash that happens. One moment, they're craving connection. The next, they're shutting down, saying something cold, or convincing themselves their partner isn't the one. It's a cycle. Get close, feel anxious, pull away, then regret it, but not know how to fix it. And the part they rarely say out loud, but often admit in a safe space like therapy, is that this behavior leaves them feeling empty and ashamed. They may even recognize that they've repeated this pattern in every relationship they've had. They'll talk about how, no matter how loving or safe their partner is, there's always this tipping point where they get overwhelmed and push that person away. Then when the relationship starts falling apart, they're devastated, not because they didn't care, but because they cared too much and didn't know how to stay without panicking. The root of this sabotage isn't malice, it's fear. Fear of rejection, fear of losing themselves, fear of being seen and not being enough. And because these fears live deep in their unconscious, they act them out in ways they don't fully understand. It takes a lot of inner work and emotional courage to even name the pattern, let alone start changing it. But the moment avoidants begin to see their sabotage for what it is, a defense, not a decision, they can start doing something different. They can catch the impulse to push away and sit with the discomfort instead. They can learn to communicate their fear instead of hiding behind withdrawal or criticism. And over time, they discover something radical, that being vulnerable doesn't destroy love. It's what makes love real and safe and worth staying for. One of the most surprising things avoidants reveal in counseling is how emotionally overwhelmed they actually feel, almost all the time. On the surface, they often come across as calm, detached, or unaffected. They might even seem indifferent when things get emotional, but that's not the full story. Inside, they're often flooded with feelings they don't know how to process. And because they were never taught how to handle emotional intensity safely, their default response is to shut down. What makes this particularly hard to see from the outside is that avoidants rarely show their overwhelm. They've learned to keep their internal world private. When stress rises, they don't lean into connection, they retreat. They compartmentalize, go silent, or bury themselves in tasks. To the people close to them, it can feel like they're being ignored or rejected. But what's really happening is that they're trying to protect themselves from feelings that feel like too much, too fast. In therapy, avoidants often admit that they don't even know how to name what they're feeling. They'll say things like, I just feel off, or I don't know what's wrong with me. That emotional numbness isn't a lack of feeling, it's a defense against overwhelm. Their emotional container, so to speak, is small. A little bit of vulnerability, a little too much closeness, and it spills over, not outwardly, but inwardly, as anxiety, irritability, or withdrawal. That's why avoidants often disconnect after moments of emotional intensity, even if those moments were positive. A deep conversation, a romantic weekend, or a moment of true connection might leave them needing to retreat, not because they didn't enjoy it, but because it exhausted them emotionally. They rarely talk about this openly outside of therapy. Many don't fully understand it themselves. They just know that they need space or that they feel like they're suffocating, even if nothing bad has happened. They may beat themselves up for being too sensitive or too cold at the same time. It's a painful contradiction, feeling too much but not knowing how to feel it safely or how to let someone else in to help them hold it. What makes this internal experience even harder is the guilt that follows. They often regret pulling away, but they don't know how to re-engage. They may want to talk but can't find the words. They care, but they feel paralyzed. And because they believe they're supposed to be strong and independent, admitting they're emotionally overloaded feels weak or even shameful. Healing begins when they start recognizing this overwhelm not as failure, but as a sign of emotional overprotection. In therapy, they learn that the feelings aren't the enemy. With support, they begin expanding their capacity to feel without shutting down. They practice staying just a little longer in connection before retreating. And slowly, they start to trust that emotional intimacy won't drown them. It can actually hold them if they let it.